She said it on the third morning, not the first, when she arrived at my door with a duffel bag and a court document I hadn't asked for. Not the second, when we sat across from each other at the kitchen table and ate toast in silence so thick it had a texture. The third morning, she was standing at the window with a cup of coffee in both hands, watching the rain come down on the empty street below, and without turning around she said it quietly, like she was saying it to herself as much as to me. "Don't fall in love with me, Daniel." I didn't answer. I was behind her, leaning against the counter, staring at the back of her head, at the way her dark hair was still messy from sleep, and thinking that I had already failed. Not entirely, not yet, but there was something happening in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time, and it had started the moment she knocked on my door 2 nights before. I already knew it wasn't going to stop just because she asked it to. I should have listened. I didn't. But let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 33. A structural engineer living alone on the 4th floor of a building in Portland, Oregon. I spend my days calculating load-bearing tolerances, making sure the things people build don't fall on the people inside them. It's precise work, and I liked that about it, and I like that about most things. My life before that rainy Tuesday in November was orderly, quiet in a way I'd mistaken for contentment, a life that looked complete from the outside, and felt like a room with most of the furniture missing from the inside. I'd been engaged once to a woman named Claire. We made sense on paper, logically, without much heat. She left and said she felt like she was living next to someone, not with someone. I couldn't argue because she was right. After that, I stopped trying, not out of bitterness, more out of honesty. I'd quietly started to believe I was the kind of person who wasn't built for that kind of closeness. Then came the knock at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I wasn't asleep. I was at the kitchen table with blueprints and cold coffee, the kind of night I'd made a habit of. When I opened the door, she was standing in the hallway in a gray sweater damp at the shoulders, looking at me the way you look at someone when you're trying very hard not to look like you need anything. "I'm Nora," she said. "I moved into 4C 2 weeks ago. My heat isn't working and the landlord isn't answering. I just need to know if yours is working." I told her mine was fine, offered her a space heater. She said she didn't want to be any trouble. I said it wasn't. She came in, stood close enough to the door that she could leave in 2 steps, and looked around my apartment with careful eyes, the way someone looks at a new place when they're still deciding if it's safe. I found the heater, handed it to her, and she left. Something in me had shifted in those 4 minutes in a way I wasn't going to be able to explain. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw her 3 times, always polite, brief, giving nothing away, the kind of person who knew how to take up exactly as much space as necessary and not an inch more. Then, 2 nights after the heater, another knock, this one at midnight, without the careful composure of the first. Her eyes were red. She'd clearly been crying and had stopped right before she knocked. She had a phone in one hand and a court document folded into her coat pocket. "I need to ask you something strange," she said. I told her, okay. She said she needed a place to stay for a few days. Her landlord was trying to evict her over something she hadn't done. There was going to be a hearing, and until then she wasn't supposed to go back inside alone. Her friend had backed out at the last minute, and I was the only person in the building she'd spoken more than 4 words to. She said all of it without breaking eye contact, like someone who'd learned to state facts cleanly because emotion had gotten her nowhere before. I told her the second bedroom was empty. She said 3 days at most, set her keys on the table, looked at me and said, "Thank you." Just those 2 words. Then she closed the bedroom door, and I stood in the hallway listening to the quiet and thinking, there is someone else breathing in this apartment, and the feeling that came with that was not inconvenience. It was something else entirely. Which brings us back to the third morning, the rain on the window, the coffee in both hands, and the warning I didn't take. That evening I asked what she meant by it. She closed her laptop slowly, looked at her hands, then at me. "I'm not in a place for it," she said.
The people who try end up frustrated.
I've been told I'm distant, that I keep people at arm's length. I think all of that is true, and I'm not going to apologize for it. But I don't want to start something that ends with you feeling like I took something from you. I thought about that for a long time before I said, "Noted." She nodded, opened the laptop again, and that was the end of a conversation that wasn't really an end at all. The hearing was 6 days out. In that time I learned things about Nora Callahan gradually. The way you learn the layout of a room you're living in, moving through it in the dark, She woke before light, made coffee first, needed 12 minutes of silence before she'd speak to anyone. She worked from the kitchen table with the same precision she moved through the apartment. There was a scar on the inside of her left wrist she never explained, and I never asked about. She didn't sleep well. I could tell by the light under her door at 2 and 3 in the morning. On the fourth night, I was on the couch at midnight when she came out for water and stopped when she saw me. I said I couldn't sleep. She said she couldn't either and sat across from me in the dark. After a long silence, she said, "The landlord is saying I damaged the apartment. I didn't." She told me the rest slowly, the emotion stripped out until you could feel it anyway underneath. She'd moved in 4 months earlier after leaving a relationship that had taken 2 years and most of her savings to exit. The landlord had been fine, then less fine, then made comments she ignored, then tried something she shut down hard, and then came the accusations and the eviction notice. I asked if she had documentation. She said photos from the day she moved in. Then she said, "I'm not fragile. I've been through things that were harder than this." I said I knew, and I meant it. On the 5th morning, she made breakfast without being asked. I came out to eggs and toast and coffee already made, and she was reading at the table like this was something she'd always done. "I noticed you don't eat before work," she said. "That's different from not needing to eat." I sat and ate and thought, this is the most domestic scene I've been part of in 3 years, with someone I met 9 days ago. That should have worried me. It did. Not enough to change anything. The day before the hearing, she asked me to come, not to testify, just to be there. "I don't have anyone else to ask right now," she said. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She looked at me like she'd braced for a negotiation and gotten an agreement instead and said, "Okay." Just that, but it carried more than the word. The hearing room was small and cold the way government rooms always are. The landlord sat with his lawyer, looking at Nora with the composure of a man who expected to win. She walked in like she owned the floor, presented her photos and documentation, and his claims came apart in stages, slowly, and then all at once. 2 hours later, the ruling was in her favor. Outside, in the gray light, she said, "Thank you for coming." I said it was nothing. She looked at me and said, "It wasn't nothing," and looked away again. That evening, she packed with the same efficiency she did everything. Sheets folded, mug washed, and returned to the cabinet. The apartment left exactly as she'd found it. I watched from the hallway and felt something close to grief, which was absurd, because she'd been there 6 days and was moving 20 feet down the hall. At the door, she said, "I meant what I said." The other morning, I said I knew. I'm not easy to know. I know that too. Most people give up eventually. I'm not most people. She looked at me a long moment, something moving across her face that she didn't let land, and said, "Good night, Daniel." I said good night, and she left, and I stood in an apartment that now felt like a different kind of empty, the kind that knows exactly what it's missing. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. She'd been clear about what she didn't want, and I respected plain language. And I was also a person who started leaving for work 15 minutes later, hoping to catch her in the elevator, who checked the mailbox at times I never used to, who stood on my side of the wall one Thursday evening, listening to her door open and close and didn't knock. If you've ever loved someone who didn't know it yet, or knew it and wasn't ready, you understand exactly what those evenings felt like. A month after the hearing, she knocked on a Sunday afternoon with a book in her hand about structural failure in historical bridges. "I had 2 copies by accident," she said. Our fingers touched on the cover for 1 second. She let go first. "How did you know I'd be interested in this?" I asked. "You're a structural engineer." Bridge failures seemed relevant. She started to go, then turned back. "Do you want to get coffee sometime?" "Not like that." "Just coffee." "Just coffee sounds good." Coffee was Wednesday. She was already there, and closed her book without marking her page when I sat down, which I noticed because she was the kind of person who remembered where she was. We talked 2 hours about work, about Portland, about growing up in Vermont and moving 4 times in 7 years chasing work that kept changing shape. At some point the coffee was gone and neither of us moved. She looked out at the street and said, "This is strange." I asked what was. "I'm comfortable." "Like it's a problem." "Is it a problem?" "I don't know yet." "That seems like a fair place to be," I said, and she almost smiled. The weeks that followed were the strangest I'd known in years. Coffee on Wednesdays became a thing without becoming a thing. She brought me the second bridge book when she found it. I brought her the coffee beans she'd mentioned liking. I learned more about her in the space between conversations than in the conversations themselves. The way she leaned her head against the window on a Saturday drive to the coast, just to see the water. The way she went very still when music she loved came on, like she needed to take it in with her whole body. She texted me a photo of a badly designed parking garage captioned, "This would not pass your tolerances," and the feeling that came with it was small and warm and entirely disproportionate to a photo of a parking garage. She was letting me in slowly, carefully, the way you open a window in winter, just enough to move the air, not enough to lose the heat. I didn't push, didn't name things. Told myself patience was a form of respect, and also stood in my apartment on certain nights feeling something so close to longing it had its own gravity. What finally broke the silence came from outside. Her name was Patricia Wells, director of a research institute that had been trying to recruit Nora for months. She called on a Thursday evening, and an hour later Nora was on my couch, hands flat on her knees. They want me to move to Seattle. The position is everything I've spent 5 years working toward. I didn't say anything. The offer's real. The timeline is 60 days. Are you going to take it? She looked at me, and this is the moment I think about most from that year. The way she looked at me like the answer was a question, and the question was me. "I don't know," she said. "What would make you know?" A long silence. Then, "Daniel." "Yeah. I told you not to fall in love with me." "I know." "Did you listen?" I looked at her and said, "No." The words sat in the room between us. She looked at her hands, at the window, at some middle distance that wasn't me and wasn't the room. Then she looked back, eyes very bright, and said, "I'm scared of this. I know that too. I'm not good at it. I'm not going to suddenly be easy." "Nora." "What?" "I know. All of it. I've known since the third morning. I've just been waiting for you to know it too." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then something in her face shifted, very slightly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves, and she said, "I'm still scared." "I know. You're going to have to be patient with me. I have time. I might still be hard to reach sometimes. I know how to wait. Why aren't you trying to talk me out of being afraid?" "Because your fear is reasonable," I said. "Because you learned it from something real. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't make sense. I'm just going to be here until it has less power than it does right now." She went very still. "That might take a long time. I'm aware of that." "You should have listened to me." "Probably. Why didn't you?" And I thought about the morning at the window, the coffee in both hands, the rain, the back of her head, the thing that had been building in my chest since before I had a name for it. "Because some warnings come too late," I said, "because by the time you said it, I'd already made a decision I hadn't consciously made yet. Because you stood in my kitchen in a gray sweater with damp shoulders looking at the apartment like you were deciding whether it was safe, and I saw something in that I recognized. Someone being honest about what they needed and afraid that needing it was wrong. And I couldn't walk away from that." She was very still. "You noticed all of that." "I notice most things about you." "That's going to be a problem," she said. Quiet then. Smaller. "I didn't take the call from Seattle." "You said they called Thursday." "I know. It's Thursday." "I know that too." She stood, crossed the distance that had never really been far, stopped in front of me and said, "I need you to understand that this is hard for me. I know. I'm going to mess it up sometimes. So will I." She looked at me one more long moment, then closed her eyes, leaned forward, and rested her forehead against my chest, and stayed there. I put my arms around her, slowly, not tight, just enough to tell her she was somewhere that would hold. We stood like that a long time without speaking, the particular quiet that had always lived in my apartment rearranging itself into something with warmth in it. Into my shirt she said, "I still can't promise I'll be easy." "I'm a structural engineer," I said. "I spend my life figuring out how things hold together." She lifted her head. "That's either very reassuring or very alarming. I prefer to think of it as relevant experience." She almost laughed. "Not quite. Close enough. That is not where the story ends. Because love stories don't end. They just reach the place where the telling can stop and the living can begin. What I can tell you is what came after. That she didn't take the Seattle position. That she'd made the decision before she ever came to my apartment that Thursday night. That she was still hard to reach sometimes, just like she'd warned me. and that I learned to sit with the quiet nights without trying to fix them, because some things don't need fixing. They need room. That she started leaving a coffee cup in my cabinet, and I started leaving the window unlocked on the nights she stayed late, because she always wanted to feel like she could leave, even when she wasn't going to. That the bridge book sat on her nightstand, and she kept texting me photos of structural problems in public buildings, and I kept texting back assessments, and she called them my professional opinion, and I called them love letters. 6 months in, on a Sunday morning, she was at my window again with coffee in both hands, and I was behind her at the counter, and without turning around, she said, "I'm glad you didn't listen to me." I know. I was wrong. I know that too. She turned around, her face open in a way it hadn't been the first time she stood there. "I'm still not easy," she said. "You're worth every complicated inch," I told her. That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm raising the bar. She set the coffee down, walked toward me, and said, "You have no idea how long I've been waiting to be seen like that. You could have told me sooner." I was afraid, I know. I said it every time I could. I am still saying it, and I mean it the same way I meant it that first morning, when she stood at the window and told me not to do the very thing I had already done. There is one more thing. A Sunday in March, 4 months after the night she rested her forehead against my chest and the apartment rearranged itself into something warm. She was at the window again, coffee in both hands, rain on the glass, her hair messy from sleep, and I was against the counter watching her the way I always did, quietly, without needing her to know it. Without turning around, she said, "This is the first place I've lived in 7 years that I didn't want to leave before I arrived." I let the words settle. Then she turned, and her face was open, and she said, "I'm staying." Just that. "I know," I said. I just wanted to say it out loud. She turned back to the rain. I stayed against the counter. Neither of us needed to say anything else, and so we didn't. And the silence between us was full in the way silence between two people only gets when they've earned it slowly, carefully, without forcing anything, without taking anything that wasn't offered. I should have listened to her. I didn't. And every morning since, she has been standing at my window, and the room has been warm, and I have understood something it took me 33 years and one knock at 11 at night to finally learn. The right person does not make your life simple. They make your life feel like it is finally, completely yours.